Yeah.
Because Brad is back there.
So that's mine. No.
I think that's really what we're sitting there.
Oh, okay.
No, this is. They did have. Yeah, no, this is what we have. This is what they gave. Okay.
I was just thinking that. Thank you. Or you could say it's here, I can sit in the back like Brad.
All right, by my clock, it is 1:30. If you want to begin.
We'll begin. I'm calling this meeting to order, the January 11th, 2022 TBARTA TMC meeting. Welcome everybody and Happy New Year. I'm Jonathan Roberson from Manatee County Area Transit. Can we get roll call?
Okay, I will start the roll call. Janina Elkin. Adelie LeGrand.
Present.
Chris Cochran. Okay. Jonathan Roberson.
Present.
Kurt Scheibel.
Present.
Brad Miller.
Red is good.
I'm Jacob Labutka filling in for Brad Miller.
Okay.
Jacob Labutka, I'll give you the spelling. I can give you the spelling later.
Okay, I got it. Okay, I think that does give us a quorum.
Okay. And anybody else on the phone besides Mr. Jedick?
There's nobody else.
All right, moving on. Do we have anybody in the audience who'd like to speak on a public comment item? Okay, anybody online?
We
We
do
do
have,
have one email. I'm sorry, Lorraine. We do have one email if you'd like me to read that now.
All right.
Thank you. This is from Andrew Morris. The recently enacted Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act is creating new grant funding opportunities to assist with expanding Amtrak service and private passenger rail projects like Brightline. The Tampa Bay metro area currently lacks reliable and frequent intercity passenger rail service to other major metro areas in Florida. The lack of frequent and reliable intercity passenger rail service negatively impacts the ridership of existing local and regional transit services and makes proposed local and regional transit projects less attractive to fund. Reliable and frequent intercity passenger rail service in the Tampa Bay metro area would serve as the foundation for building a stronger multimodal transportation system. Existing local and regional transit services would benefit from the improved connectivity, leading to higher ridership and revenue. Proposed local and regional transit projects would be more attractive to fund because they would have a higher ridership potential from the connections with frequent and reliable intercity passenger rail service. The infrastructure improvements required for intercity passenger rail would also make implementing regional rail in the Tampa Bay metro area much more affordable since the necessary infrastructure to support passenger rail would already be there. Amtrak, Brightline, and the Federal Railroad Administration and FDOT all need to be directly involved with TBARTA's CSX corridor study. Since local funding is limited, focusing on attracting state, federal, and private funding should be prioritized. Federal grants are focused more on intercity passenger rail service, currently compared to regional rail. Out of the existing CSX corridors in the Tampa Bay metro area, the Clearwater subdivision between downtown Tampa, Clearwater, and St. Petersburg has the strongest potential for intercity passenger rail service since it connects to major population centers, tourist entertainment destinations, and has minimal freight rail traffic on it. Making sure Amtrak and Brightline connect downtown Tampa, Clearwater, and St. Petersburg with the rest of Florida should be a primary goal with the study. Regional rail throughout the rest of the Tampa Bay metro area could be phased in after Amtrak and Brightline are connected to downtown Tampa, Clearwater, and St. Petersburg. We need to maximize this opportunity with the CSX corridor study to implement frequent and reliable intercity passenger rail service to the region and create the foundation to support a stronger multimodal transportation system for the Tampa Bay metro area. And that was submitted by Andrew Morris.
Okay, thank you, Chris. There's no more public comment received? Okay, thank you. Moving on to consent agenda items. November meeting minutes. Be looking for a motion to move the November meeting minutes. Okay. Is there any-
Second.
Second on that? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Excellent. Okay, we're moving right along here to a presentation. Oh, sorry, opposed, the same sign. Okay, all approved, thanks. Moving on to presentations. I didn't know it was coming up so quick, but are we on?
Yep, we are on. Chris, if you can pull up Jonathan's slide, and while you're doing that, I just want to set the stage for Jonathan. I asked Jonathan, and he was gracious enough to accept to give a short presentation on MCAT's program of improvements, their short-term unfunded transit needs. And the thought was that at our subsequent meetings, we would have presentations from the rest of you. So perhaps when we meet again, I believe we're going to be meeting in April is our next meeting. We'll be meeting in Hillsborough. If one of the other agencies would be willing to give a presentation on their unfunded transit needs. That accomplishes a couple of things. One, I think it helps us all to understand what's going on at each one of our sister agencies. And also what Jonathan's going to talk about, the unfunded needs, is going to feed into discussion of our next agenda item, item 5A, which is the regional unfunded transit needs list. So that's just kind of the background of why I asked Jonathan if he could talk about this today. So I hand it over to you.
Thanks, Brian. And I know I kind of brought this up at the last meeting. And I just wanted to see if we could have a meaningful item where and some meaningful use of the regional unfunded transit needs list. Having come from a region where we had this before, it did end up in some FDOT funding for capital, especially for buses and bus stops and shelters and things like that for us down there. And I know it doesn't address that ever growing need for O&M funding, but I thought it's a start, and it's always handy, in my opinion, to have have other agencies in the region at least familiar with your top needs. You never know what might come up. And so I thought I'd give it a start and keep this brief. A lot of our needs down in Manatee County revolve around service on our highest use corridors. And I won't go over every corridor, but you know, we're hoping to increase frequency on any route that's hourly headways to a half hour, and that's mostly addressed here. We'd like to see some expansion on service over the Skyway from Manatee County to Pinellas County in the morning and PM peak periods. And again, a number of other routes, really some very local community routes have needs. So I know it's not easy for that to show up in a regional plan or regional TDP, but that's what I have reflected here. The other thing we're going to be doing, probably piloting soon, and we're getting asked continually really to pilot, is additional mobility on demand services. So that's something we're looking in the near future to do as well. And really the last service on the route is on the list is to increase our service in northern Manatee County on Route 301 and 41. You know, someday you may see this list, not to frighten Hillsborough, but who knows? We may have a route on this list someday that connects to heart service in southern Hillsborough. They're just around the corner from us, but it is something I get asked about now and then. But for now, being new to this committee, I thought this was a start. We have a brand new garage and office space, so that type of facility is not a big need for us down in Manatee County. We jointly share some services with Sarasota Area County Transit, and they have up-to-date facilities as well. So to speak for the South Bay region a bit, it feels like we're pretty good on facilities. It's more about the service, and our service levels really need to go up. So I hope anytime you can sell this for me, great. But I'm also hoping TBARTA and their TDP, regional TDP, which I understand could be updated annually, might start to reflect some of these needs, even if it isn't a corridor that's regional in nature or whatever the definitions are. This is really mostly what's in our TDP. So I would hope that our other partners in the region, such as the FDOT districts, MPOs, and so on, would want to see this and maybe could start thinking about some of the need in the region. I like to keep the narrative to our fixed route bus services first. When it comes to transit, I know it's not the only narrative, but again, in my experience, it's been helpful to have these needs always present and maybe always reflected in both local and regional plans. So I'm going to leave it at that. I didn't know if there was any questions, but this was just a start. I would love to see just from every agency over the next year, maybe one meeting your top needs. You know, it would just be nice to know, and then I hope it can get reflected programmatically somehow with the TBARTA regional TDP. So that's really it. Is anybody on the dais have any comments or questions or suggestions on when they might want to present their needs?
I think this is a good start. I agree that as a region, if we start getting the more we produce our top ones out there, the more they get noticed, and hopefully FDOT and FTA will say, hey, look, this is a regional thing. The regional's pushing it forward, even though it may be a local item, it will help. I know you guys did there was one service that you went to TBARTA and they helped you get some money with the letter of support. Those type of things are good. Now, up in our area, we're more of we have both facility needs and other needs. So, and we're about to do a complete study to help look at that. But so we don't have a lot right now, but I can see in the future after our studies, then we're going to have some unmet needs that we're going to be looking for to also bring forth and hopefully get to BARTA help champion those transportation needs, corridor, non-corridor. But I think they will support the region no matter where they're at.
I would agree with that, Kurt. But facilities are critical, and if again, I'm lucky I came to an agency that just did a new garage and maintenance facility, but in this business, that's a big deal, and it's not always easy in the discretionary funding world to put those packages together. So anybody else? Who's interested in Nina? Are you interested in next meeting maybe?
Yeah, maybe I will be able to do a presentation. We only have actually 2 projects on our list of TDP that I can talk about. And we're actually right now going to put out a study on that. We're going to be looking for a transit facility and service expansion to the east side of the county. So we can do that in the next meeting. Thank you.
That'd be great. And again, if anybody else is interested, if we don't hear it today, I think if you let Brian, staff know, we could have a good, it could be multiple agencies, of course, at one time.
Yeah, and just a reminder, our next TMC meeting will be April 5th, and it's scheduled to be in Hillsborough. We don't have a specific location, that's still to be determined, but we are supposed to be in Hillsborough in April, so April 5th. So you've got some time, Janine, to put if you want to put
I don't
something
have
together.
that name. Thank you.
And I might not have said it, but probably in the top project on our list, we may go for a service development grant this spring. And last time we did that, TBARTA did a resolution and a support letter, a support resolution for the grant, and that was part of our grant application. And in my opinion, was pretty helpful with FDOT and our board. So just a thought, that's kind of the immediate benefit of a list like this, but again, I keep saying it, but sometimes you have to remind people of the immediate needs out there on the street, especially with service, as all these other rapid transit and premium transit options come our way, or other fads. So, all right. Anybody have anything to add, or?
No, I'll just say that PSJ would be happy to also present its unfunded needs. I know top of mind for us right now, our number one federal legislative priority is to get funding for the Clearwater Multimodal Transit Center to replace our Park Street Terminal in downtown Clearwater. So I know it's something we're going to really be pushing for this year.
Great. Look forward to seeing that. Excellent. Okay. Well, moving on to discussion items. I think we've partly covered this, but Brian, you have a regional unfunded transit needs list.
Right, and Chris, if you could pull up that list. I've started putting together a template. At the last TMC meeting, we talked about putting together an unfunded regional transit needs list that would include a couple of things. It would include regional service that was identified in TBARTA's Envision 2030 TDP. But then also, and if you could scroll down just a little bit, Chris, you can see how like MCAT has provided me their information. What my goal is to include from each one of your TDPs what your top, say top 5 unfunded needs are using this format. So basically it would be the route, a description of what is the service improvement that you're trying to attain, and the capital and operating costs. I see this list as serving 2 purposes. Once we get it done, the plan is we would be including this in our monthly TBARTA board agenda packets. So we keep this list front and center with our own board members because they're always asking us, why aren't we getting anything done? Well, this is kind of our response. Well, here's the list and this is how much it's going to cost. And so it keeps that list in front of their eyes and they can help us to go identify money for these projects. That's one thing. Second, and Jonathan touched on this, if your agencies go to apply for, say, a service development grant, well, here's another list that you can point to in your application saying, look, TBARTA has identified our project on their list too. It's been identified as something that's important to the Tampa Bay region. So yes, it's another list, but it's a list that hopefully you can use to your advantage and it will help you and it will help TBARTA because frankly, TBARTA, we're trying to find different ways to bring value to the region and show that, TBARTA's existence helps make things better in terms of transportation. And we're just trying to find different ways to do that. And this was just an idea that we had of having this list. So I've got information from MCAT. I have a little bit of information from Hernando, but I didn't have the operating and capital costs. But just so as your schedule permits, if you could go back, look at your own TDPs and just at your earliest convenience, just email me your information. I will add it to the list. Now, I think Kurt, you said you're in the process. Is it a COA that you're in the process of doing right now?
It's been, the contract has not been signed and approved by the board, but yes, it's.
Yeah, so for your part of the template, I may want to make some sort of a note just so that.
I can still give you 2 or 3 things from our old TDP that I think is going to translate into our new service.
Yeah, So I would probably just want to make some note in the list saying information will be forthcoming after this date, just so, for example, Commissioner Starkey doesn't ask, well, where's GoPasco's information? So that was, unless anyone's got any questions for me, that was all I had for this agenda item.
Okay, well, any discussion around the horn here? Okay, again, I hope we can connect the dots here and have, some meaningful list and something the board sees where they understand, in my opinion, what's going on in the trenches a little bit, and local service, regional service, it all equals mobility and connections for people. And I think it'll be good for them to see that if this is framed right, and we're allowed to update it constantly. All right, seeing no other questions, let's move on to item B, 6B, TMC input to the scope of work for CSX corridor study.
I am putting together, putting together information for a scope of work. They do a feasibility study of the Clearwater and Brooksville subdivisions. I put together a few slides. This first map that you see here, I just want, just so we all understand what geographic area I'm talking about. That map you see on the screen is the Brooksville subdivision. Chris, if you could go to the next slide. That is the Clearwater subdivision. So those are the two CSX corridors that we're talking about in terms of doing a study. This was discussed at the TMA leadership group meeting in December. The TBARTA would take the lead on doing the study. At our board meeting next Friday, not this coming Friday, the following Friday, we have a resolution of support that we're going to ask our board to approve, directing staff to do this study. The language talks about doing a mode agnostic feasibility study of these two subdivisions. What I wanted to share with you though is, as I've been digging more into our old historical files, the good news is we don't have to start from scratch. Chris, if you could scroll down a little bit, like a slide or two. Keep going. Keep going. Back up one. Okay, the good news is, and unfortunately this was before David or I joined TBARTA. I think we had a completely different TBARTA board back then. This is something that has been looked at before. Back in 2009, back when TBARTA was a transportation authority and did its first master plan, the CSX corridor, and specifically those two subdivisions, were looked at as part of TBARTA's initial master plan. It's a little difficult to see maybe from where you're sitting, but if you, and I'm going on my own computer, if you go up towards, if you see where Brooksville is, you see that blue line going north of Brooksville. So if you start from there, and if you start going south, you see it turn into like a gold line. Keep going south towards Tampa, becomes like red, and then go across where the Clearwater subdivision was, and then you see it cut across diagonally across Pinellas. So that corridor was looked at, and what the TBARTA master plan did back in 2009, it looked at different segments of those two CSX subdivisions. And Chris, if you could go to maybe like the next slide. Keep one more. Okay, and what it did is it went through segment by segment, and it identified what would be the best mode of transit for each one of these sub pieces of the corridor. And so it looked at, first it looked at a premium transit option. In this case, it was light rail. Then it would look at like secondary options, like if the first one didn't fit, what would be a second option, and then a third. And it looked at each one of these sub-segments and it asked a couple questions. Does that option serve regional trips? Does the mode improvement that's proposed match the demand? And are there any engineering or financial constraints that we need to be aware of? So it went through the corridor piece by piece and it asked these questions. Go down one more slide, Chris, to the next one. That graph you see on the left, what it also looked at in each one of the subcomponents of the corridor, it looked at what were the peak loads along the corridor. And that arrow, that line you see there, that's basically the capacity for bus rapid transit. So if the passenger loads were to the right of that, what it's telling you is that the passenger demand would have exceeded bus transit. And so it went through each one of the segments and it did that analysis. There was also quite a substantial public involvement component to the 2009 master plan. They went out and they asked people, well, what mode of transit would you like to see in this particular segment? So I guess that's my long-winded way of saying a lot of work has been done already. And the good news is we're not going to be starting from scratch here. I had some conversations with Ming last week. Apparently, I guess the central office is going to be meeting with CSX sometime this week to find out, are they still interested in selling the corridor? Chris, if you could go back to, there's a slide that says joint use looks like, or wait, no, excuse me. I think it's the very first one where CSX guidelines as of September 2015. Back in 2015, CSX had kind of laid down some guidelines or criteria, things that were non-negotiables for them. You know, for example, they were back in 2015, they were going to insist that even if we bought the corridor, they still would want to operate freight transit on it in perpetuity. They had said things that like the local agency has to take over the dispatch. So FDOT has to meet with CSX to find out, are these conditions that they laid out in 2015 still true? And Ming asked me to follow up with him next week to see what the results of those conversations were. The reason why I've got this on the agenda today, I've been talking one-on-one with the MPO directors because I want to get their input to the scope of work. I've talked quite a bit with Beth Alden. I've had some conversations with Whit. If there is any input that you want to give me to the scope of work, either at this meeting or later on, please do so, because we want to get everyone's input. We don't want TBARTA to put together a scope of work in a vacuum. That's kind of, I'll go ahead and shut up now and open it up for any questions or comments you got for me on this.
Thanks, Brian. Okay, anybody on the?
Oh, I'm sorry, one thing I did also want to mention. Commissioner Overman had made a request to David, when the TMA leadership meeting meets next, which I believe is going to be in March, they've asked TBARTA if they could bring the scope to them for their comment. So we still got time to put together the scope of work for this study.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Kurt, you wanted to
I
speak first?
have two questions. One is, this is more of an ignorant question and not. On a heavy rail system, according to like normal planning guidelines, how far apart our stations should be?
I don't want to give you a number off. I'm not, I'll be the first to admit, I'm not a rail expert. I would have to go look up what's the ideal station spacing for commuter rail.
Well, because the total system is about the total length. I mean, the longest distance, like 43 miles, something like that. Is that about accurate or close enough for government work? I can go 50.
Yeah.
Is that about right?
I think so, yes.
I mean, we've got this big train skidding up to speed and stopping again, because I'm looking at this, even if there's 4 stations, I mean, they're 10 miles apart. That's one in Pinellas, one in Pasco, one in Tampa, and one in Hillsborough, right? I mean, everything I hear about talks about light rail. I mean, that's what they're looking at for stations like a light rail to do as opposed to a heavy rail.
Well,
To
to
me,
clarify,
that's
in
really
the
easy.
study that was done, what they were proposing, whether it was what they call short distance rail or long distance rail, they were still, in terms of the technology, they were proposing either a diesel multiple unit or an electric multiple unit. So it would be the same type of a locomotive. And I believe diesel multiple units are capable of accelerating faster than your typical commuter rail vehicle. So it would be the same type of vehicle that would be used along the entire corridor. It just gets down to a question of the station spacing, and that would be based more on what the passenger demand is.
I understand, but because I'm looking at the next to the last one, it says passenger can be compatible with CSX rail, light rail cannot operate. So you can't do the operate, but if you go to the very last slide that you presented, I thought I saw something there, so I wanted to verify because I was trying to read it. If you can show me the last slide that you had, that you presented. Keep
Can't remember
going.
which slide it was
going,
that
keep
we,
going. Right there. So the recommendation is light rail, which is not compatible with CSX. So the 2015 actually said something along those lines. Now, one of the other things I remember is back in, I want to say 2018, 2019, when Craig Casper was the MPO director here, he presented on something on a timeline and some of the things with CSX, and he presented it when we had a meeting at the airport. I think, David, you'd just taken over. That might be something to revisit and get out there, because I know he had some really interesting conversations with CSX. Because he and I talked about it offline when we were doing a lunch one time. So that list may be longer at the from 2015 than now. And it's just, I can see that, but I'm just curious on how we can have a CSX corridor, have this nice rail on, but how we're going to make it work and how's it going to look. That's what I'm concerned about. And then when it's all said and done, how much is it going to cost? Because Brightline and all those other ones, you hear about that thing. I don't know if that needs to be in here. Is what is the cost going to be? Even if we're looking at the corridor, what will we project as a cost for that? And that's the one thing I want to make sure that we're talking about, because we're talking $1.5 billion. Well, federal government's going to come up with 80%.
Yeah.
20% of it is coming from local and state. So let's say the state even does come up with 10. We're still talking $100 million plus between all the systems that it's going to do it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's a lot of local funding that's going to come. And where's that? What's going to have to give on that? So that's the only thing I may make a recommendation on, is also to just keep the bottom line in front of us when we're moving forward. Because I mean, everyone here knows that we can put a bus on every street if you want to pay for it.
Right.
It's coming up with the pay for it. And
Differential.
I mean, we can put stewardesses, or what do they call, flight bus attendants, and caviar and champagne too. But it's
That's
we just,
right.
Yeah.
we just don't have the funding. That's, oh, I'm sorry, that's down at Manatee, you said?
No, that's out in South Florida.
South Florida, that's right, South Florida. So, but just my 2 cents.
So I just wanted to add to the conversation. Kurt, you did ask a great question as far as station spacing. And, I did spend some time, working in a space where I just happened to have this information in my head. But typically, a heavy rail station is spaced around, again, there are always exceptions, around 3 miles per station. And commuter rail is typically around 5 miles per station. So if we were going to use, and again, there are exceptions, but if we were going to use that rule of thumb, you're looking at not a lot of station spacing, because as you progress through the hierarchy of the modes, it's really based on the fact that you're moving a lot of people in these higher capacity vehicles, and then limiting your access points so that you can maintain the speed and the time that the community is expecting. In between those modes, you have light rail, where you'll have closer station spacing. So depending on the system, it could be either way, anyway from 1/4 of a mile per station stop to 3/5 of a mile. In some, locations, it might even be, 1/4 mile. Then you might have up to 1/2 mile. Then you might have a station space that's a mile apart. Give you an example, if you take the light rail system from the Denver airport to go downtown Denver, depending on where the stations are, some are a little further apart, some are closer together, but it's still a light rail system, right? But there are lots of big areas where there's nothing there, so it doesn't make sense to stop. So of course, land use plays a big part in how we move forward. And, to my comment on the presentation, I think what's important is to recognize that we are in 2022, and the environment and the land use in 2009 may not be the same. So we do recognize that a lot of work has been done in the past that we may be able to use to guide how we move forward.
But what I would caution is to not look at what was done in 2009 and accept it as the baseline of where we are today, because the environment has changed, development patterns have changed, and the need and demand may have changed as well. And lastly, I would say, you know, the community's perspective has definitely changed just from 2 years ago. I'm sure it's changed from 2009. So to make an assumption that what the community shared as far as what their desires were may indeed be different. So I just want to throw that out as a caution.
It's a great comments, guys. Anybody else want to, anything to add?
I'll make one comment. So I think it might just be worth during the study, looking at maybe existing and future agency capital projects that would integrate with this kind of system. So for example, not to keep talking about the Clearwater Multimodal Transportation Center, but I guess I am going to talk about it again. So one of the things that we're doing in the design of that facility is that it is adjacent to the CSX rail line. And of course, you know, by the time the facility is constructed, there, you know, won't be a commuter rail system, but we're designing it to where in the future, we could perhaps retrofit the area around it to build a station location in the future. So I think it might be worth seeing if there are opportunities like that now or in the future for that, you know, future station integration based on the agency facility plans.
Good stuff. Nina, do you have anything
No,
to
I
add?
would just, that's a good point, because we're gonna be going out for a transit, looking for a transit station facility, and we're gonna put in a study out there and where, when, how, and all that. So that's a very good comment, you know, that to put it on my study, on my RFP. So thank you. Good point.
Good stuff. I just had a few questions and a few comments, Brian. Excuse my ignorance on some of these, but are we clear CSX is okay with, these aren't their only subdivisions, right? These are 2 lines. There's other lines, CSX corridors in the region. These 2, they clearly still say, yes, you can study and you're free to go, because we got shut down in South Florida because one county wanted to do a study, but the other didn't. They said, don't come to us until all 3 of the counties study all 85 miles at one time. I'm just trying to avoid that situation. Do we have, could you talk about a real system on these 2 subdivisions? Or are there other CSX issues / corridors that may need to be in play that aren't in this scope? And it's okay if they are. It's just, the railroads, if you can get a straight answer out of them, that would be really nice to know right in front.
As far as I know, those are the only 2 subdivisions that have ever been on the table for possible conversion to passenger rail. Those were the only 2 subdivisions that CSX has ever expressed an interest in letting go of.
I would just be watchful that remains the bar that they've set. And if there's more or less, it'd be interesting to know. Second question was, it's my understanding LRT and freight rail corridors just pretty much a no from FRA. So I don't know if you're going to count DMU type of services light rail, but I guess an urban light rail system with catenary and all that, it seems like a real hard slog to do in freight rail, even in the right of way. Just something in my experience.
I mean, my understanding is that light rail vehicles would not be allowed to operate on the same rail right of way if there's going to be freight traffic operating on it. Even if it's separated by time of day, you're not allowed to operate a light rail vehicle.
I think it's important to keep that clear with folks that that's done elsewhere. The light rail, we're talking some kind of heavy rail or commuter rail, and make sure you talk about the difference between heavy rail, DMU, and commuter rail, because it often people confuse the 2.
And I think that's why in this 2009 plan, like you see the slide, it says light rail, but if you read the text here, what they mean by light rail, what they really are talking about is short distance rail. I mean, we're talking about DMU units.
I would punt light rail to the urban areas, frankly, and the term, but just a suggestion. A couple of comments. Station spacing can quickly become a political issue, and every board member may want one, and then the next thing you know, you have stations every mile apart. It's something to keep in mind. I think, like Adelaide wisely pointed out, have a good spec sheet of what the typical heavy rail, commuter rail system does, so there's realistic expectations. And in South Florida with Brightline and FEC type of development, it was pretty soon there were stations less than 2 miles apart, and they were popular mayors on the MPO board, and it was just really hard to say no to one of them eventually, I think, in the planning phase, but it's just something to keep in mind. And hopefully the corridors present themselves easier. One last thing, I would consider profiling Sunrail a little bit in the Sunrail experience, both with costs and ridership, to see NFDOT's involvement and the region's involvement and their funding plan, their future funding plan, as maybe a more recent example of what's how it went down in Florida, and good and bad.
Yeah.
So other than that, I guess I'd like to know your next steps with this scope and with our comments today.
Like that, I'm just going to be, right now, I'm just gathering notes from as many different stakeholders as I can, like today, getting your thoughts on what should be included in the study. I'm going to see if I can find the old scope of work that was done for the TBARTA 2009 master plan, because there may be a lot of tasks within that scope of work that would apply just as well to what we're trying to accomplish with this study. And then basically start writing the scope.
And this goes to your board next week?
No. The only thing that's going to our board next week is a resolution of support directing staff to undertake the study.
Okay, so it is in effect on the, okay, that'll be interesting to see. Okay, any other discussion on item 6B? I hope we see this return to us another time soon, okay? Okay, on to item 6C, raised planning grants.
Yes, so I'm up again. Raised grants are typically associated with capital projects. However, you can also use them for planning studies. The FTA, they have not issued a notice of funding opportunity yet for the next round. Last year, the deadline was July of 2021 when you had to get your applications in. At some point, I imagine they will make some sort of an announcement for the next go around. You can use raised grants for planning projects to include planning, preparation, or design. Last time around, Florida had 2 planning grants. The city of Orlando got a raised planning grant to do a safe streets planning study that looked at a couple of different corridors. JTA up in Jacksonville got a raised planning grant to basically do a PD&E study that was related to their ultimate urban circulator project, which is their automated shuttle. I just wanted to bring this to your attention. If there's anything that this committee thinks would be a good planning idea to go after, because TBARTA, we are considering trying to put something together to go after a grant when a NOFO is put out there. But I just wanted to bring it to your attention in case there were any ideas the committee had for planning studies.
So I just have a question. It's more for clarification since I'm new here. So do the other agencies submit grant applications as well, or is it typical that TBARTA is the entity that goes after grant applications?
Go ahead, please.
Mostly the organizations do, if they're doing the regional grants, so something just like Pasco, Manatee, so forth, we would go for our own grants on those if it's local. But we're really trying to get with TBARTA, if we're doing a regional one, then we partner with TBARTA on something like that. And the more we can partner, because that gets, when you start partnering with TBARTA, then you get a whole bunch of people from different regions voting on it, and it makes it more regionality. So I think it helps with the FTA a little bit.
Okay, so I guess thank you for, so TBARTA would be submitting a grant application for a regional planning study.
Correct,
Is that,
correct.
okay? And then the individual agencies would submit their grants for your own planning or whatever you want.
For their
from, right?
local
Right,
project.
so I think the one thing we should have I guess an approach or strategy toward is the fact that these grants are competitive, right? So if all 5 of us are gonna submit a grant for planning, and then TBARTA is submitting a grant, the odds are we're not all gonna get those grants, right? So, and we'll be competing against each other for funding. So I think in addition to the question that you're asking, which is a great question, if we have any ideas, maybe there's a strategy that we prioritize, or at least have a conversation on who's going to go after a grant and how do we position so that somebody is successful, or maybe a couple of somebodies are successful, instead of, just approaching it with everybody applying and nobody.
I'm just kind of looking at those
See
grant dots up there, and I don't see a lot of small urban areas represented in there, really. I know there's a couple of rural ones up there, and I don't know if you can answer that or not. Because this used to be the old Tiger grants, correct?
So you say
This used to be old Tiger grants.
Yes.
So, yeah, that is very competitive, but they are still looking at, unless it's a rural or a tribal, most of the people are getting it are like El Paso, Jacksonville, Dallas, Oak City, Salt Lake City. I don't know what's that, that's Buffalo, no, it's not Buffalo, that's what's Ohio up there. I'm just looking at those are all the big cities, and you're looking at some of your rurals. They got South Dakota, that's probably Rapid City, things like that. I'm just not sure what they went for, but for me as a unit, I just don't have the team at the moment to even be able to meet all the requirements due to the fact that it takes so long, and I would have to partner with the borrower.
Right, and which I think should be a part of the strategy, right? So if a couple of us don't have the capacity to go after a grant on our own, then strategically, I think it makes sense to work together to create maybe, a project that has multiple phases that may be able to support not just one agency, but a couple who don't have the internal capacity that can be sponsored by TBARTA, where Hart will probably go after a grant on our own. And I don't want to speak for PSTA, but you may decide to go after a grant on your own. But at least we're not walking out of this room being unclear of who is going to go after what. And then we can make a decision. I do think, and again, this is just me being a new person, so you can shoot me down, but we could also have a conversation about which projects do we think are more competitive than the others, right? Because again, the ultimate goal should be that we're trying to get as much money as possible into the region. So as a committee, if we then have a conversation and we say, okay, we think these projects are more competitive, let's use this kind of vehicle to fund these projects, and then let's have a conversation and identify other funding opportunities, especially with this new infrastructure bill, to move the other projects forward. Because if we can all, as a committee, find ways to advance all the projects, then we're doing a dynamite job. If we spend time to just compete against each other and don't advance anything, then we'll come for these meetings, but it'll just be to show up, right? So just want to throw that out as a part of identifying what the projects could be, or the project could be, including some sort of strategy around how we go about looking for funding sources to move all of our projects forward outside of just the raise grant opportunity, but bus and bus facility, NOLA, like all of the grant pools that we have available. How do we want to position ourselves, and which projects are more competitive or better suited for the various grant opportunities?
I think it's an excellent point, and perhaps a good analogy is with the water ferry funding program, because I believe both HART and PSTA had projects.
Right.
And the decision was made to for HART's project to go forward, so that PSTA and HART weren't competing against one another, and end up neither one of them getting funded. So I think that's a very good point.
Great points. I would just add, I do wonder if the MPOs and the regional MPO body, I think it's called Suncoast, excuse my ignorance on it, they kind of.
Suncoast Transportation Planning Alliance.
Sometimes they go for some of these grants, and it would be nice to know if they have a kind of sheet of priorities they're setting also with funding or grants, because I've seen, you know, maybe I wouldn't want to be competing against an MPO as a member of this committee. I'd frankly rather it come from this committee, somebody in transit. So if we can get an idea of those goals from but it's not an unimportant perspective, but it's just, and quite frankly, even the two FDOT districts, sometimes there may be something going on there as well, or maybe we're all doing something together someday, but
Team up.
yeah, or at least know when to support something because somebody else is far ahead on something.
I mean, I guess it's kind of good that USDOT has not posted a notice of funding opportunity yet, so we don't know when the next go around is going to be. So it gives us time to get our house in order to figure out what projects would we want to go for when the time comes, and we're not scrambling.
Speaking related to that, did you expect as the TBARTA staff to be presenting to your board at some point an update on the infrastructure bill? When more information is available, or as an update item, or your finance committee? I'm just curious about.
Well, we generally get updates from our federal lobbyists at each
Okay.
one of the board meetings
At
on
the board
what's the latest information. I imagine we'll be getting one at the board meeting not this Friday, next Friday.
Okay,
Recommend going to the earlier meetings, not the main board meetings. It seems like they go into more detail in earlier meetings.
okay, so,
I'm sorry, yeah, my mic, I'm just recommending that you go to the earlier meetings. I think it's the policy meeting that they bring that up. They actually go into a little bit more detail with the policy meeting where they try and keep it at a higher level. I've noticed. That might just be a suggestion to go to the policy one, because I think the discussions in there is almost as good, if not better, than some of the ones in the main meeting, but that's just my humble opinion.
okay. Good to know. Okay, any other comments on item 6C? Moving on to new business. This is rather an open-ended item, kind of a, does anybody have anything to add for this particular meeting? And quite frankly, maybe moving forward in future meetings. Anybody? Anything else?
I'll go about what Go Pasco is. There's a lot of things been happening at Go Pasco recently. We're about to close on an intelligent transportation system RFP. So we'll be really looking at some new stuff there, and we're really excited about that. I already mentioned our, what we call it, the route expansion contraction study, what I call the REX, just because I have a sense of humor sometimes. It's small, but it's there. And so we're about to start that off here relatively soon, and we're really excited about that. And if you want to know what I always brief to whoever asked it, I'm throwing a stick of dynamite out there, just blowing up our routes, starting from scratch. And it goes back to something that Ali said about where we were 5 years ago was different where we were 10 years ago. Well, this route that we've been doing has been there for 25 years. And so Route 54 Route 54 went from a 2-lane road to a 6-lane road. It needs to be like a 10-lane road even now if you haven't driven it lately. So we're really looking at that. And then just growing in Pasco County and being hit by COVID like everybody else. But I like some of the unfunded stuff that's going on, and I'll be able to get you some things. When I say my team will be getting you some things in the next day or two, so you have them for your main meeting for unfunded mandates.
Okay.
Going forward.
Great.
Other than that, I hope everyone had a great holidays and looking forward to the new year.
Anybody else on the dance? Any new business or updates on your
Actually, I was just gonna make a suggestion, something I was thinking about when talking about the raised planning grants. So I know something that we've done at PSDA with a lot of grant opportunities. So I remember when I first started here, I did a Freedom of Information Act request to see what some of the winning Lono and bus facilities grants looked like, just because we've obviously wanted to put together a successful application package. So I wonder if it might be a good idea for maybe TBARTA to do something similar, whether it's the raised planning grant or other grant opportunities that we collectively or maybe individually as agencies might go after to maybe look at some of the use cases of some of those winning grant applications and seeing if there's, any projects both individually or regionally that we could apply for that might align with some of the previous winning projects.
Especially once they know our needs list. So, just saying.
Make sure.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
Yeah, but before we adjourn, not to put Janina and Jacob you two on the spot, but do I have a commitment from you two at the next meeting if you could give a presentation on your unfunded?
Sure.
Now, I mean, you saw what Jonathan presented. We're not looking for like a long, in-depth presentation on your whole TDP. It's basically, it could just be one slide. Here are our short-term unfunded needs that if we had money, we would implement today in terms of operational improvements.
Yeah, I had like a 20-slide presentation, but I didn't want to. I know somebody would throw something at me, sorry.
No, Brian, don't worry. Just
Okay.
a couple pages. Thanks.
It's good. Okay. Now moving on to items to the TBARTA board. I'm not quite sure what this item is. Is this,
New business.
I mean, what are we seeing? I'll start it. What are we seeing on the agenda for next week for the board, just out of curiosity?
I don't have it in front. David, I don't think we've got anything major on the agenda for next week's board meeting.
Okay.
Other than the CSS study, thing.
The regional list will be on there.
No, not the regional unfunded, because that's still going to take me a little bit of time to put
Okay,
together.
all right.
That's not ready to go yet.
Yeah, the board agenda next week doesn't have anything significant on it. We've got some items that are carrying forward from previous meetings that they were unable to vote on due to lack of a quorum.
Okay.
We do have a contract amendment that we're going to ask approval for between TBARTA and USF, which is kind of like a general services agreement. It's something that we've had in place for the past 2 years that we can tap into if we need them to assist us with anything. If so, we've got that available to us. If not, then, we don't need to use it.
Okay, so is there anything you need from TMC members that you could see at this moment at the board meeting?
Just to brief the board on the highlights of what we discussed today.
Okay. Well, I'm not seeing any other topics here, so looking for a motion to adjourn here. And a second?
I second.
Okay. Meeting's adjourned.